Chéileachair agus tá míid thar bheith sásta go bhfuil méid údra is tá a gcuin mlíana. Just bhhailm má bhuiachas a go bháil leis an coiste atá tréis an féile ar fada agrú, tá sí tá blion catacha ag agrú an féile. So thank you to all the volunteers who worked so very hard to bring it to you for the weekend. I'd also like to thank Forrest na Gaeilge, Aline na Gaeltachta, the Arts Council, our associate sponsors, Dingle Distillery. I'd like to thank very much our founders. Our first festival was run purely on donations from local businesses and the founders of the festival. The volunteers and all the wonderful authors and interviewers that we have with us for the weekend. Also, just to let you know that the event is being live streamed. Okay? And now, Anish Bavalam, Róisín Chéileachair, newsreader from Radio na Gaeltachta. Beg deisigeibh ceisna a chur Paul Teresh on interview. Okay, so you'll be able to ask questions afterwards. Okay, thank you very much, Róisín. Thank you, Paul.
So you're all very welcome here. I usually speak in Irish, so this is a bit different for me, but we'll plough on. So basically, just obviously a big warm welcome to Paul, who was one of the famous Kerry football stars. Went on to make a collection with Dunnes Stores and is now an author. So welcome, Paul. Okay, so basically, I suppose what everyone is asking is, when did you think of writing a book?
Am I on it? I'm on it.
You are.
Yeah. I think this particular book, it's about, I would say, about 10 years ago, actually.
Oh, wow.
I would say that book was in my head when I began the business with Dunnes Stores. I have this clothing business, and all the stories in the book were collections over the last 8 or 10 years. And at the start of the partnership with Dunnes, I figured what was missing from men's kind of fashion, this word fashion, that I've never really fully understood the word fashion itself, to be honest with you. But what was missing was a certain vocabulary and a language that I could relate to, and that the guys I knew around me in dressing rooms or in college, or that they could speak. And so basically, I went into the business with the idea of challenging the language of fashion, really. And I went in with like a writer, and I said I would read and research a lot and bring a certain vocabulary to kind of fashion marketing. So at the start, I said I would do each collection like a chapter of an eventual book, and that's the book, basically.
Yeah, brilliant. And when did you actually start writing it then? Because it seems, to me, reading the book, it seemed like you had all the information, you were just putting it together, if you get me.
Yeah, lockdown, really.
Okay, yeah, fair.
Yeah. Lockdown. You know, we didn't know in the industry that is so tied to supply chain. The product that I make with Dunnes comes from Turkey, comes overseas. Supply chain was really badly disrupted over COVID, and I didn't know if the business would be there at the end. So I said, you know, I better do something with my time now and do the book that I felt was I felt there was a book in the collections and in the seasons, and I started on that in my car. In my car, I wrote a lot of it in my car.
Okay.
And so probably 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. Yeah.
I did learn a lot from it that I've never heard of before. I did theatre in college. Samuel Beckett, everyone's heard of Samuel Beckett. I thought he was just a playwright. He was not. And I learned a lot from Paul's book, so it was just really interesting to hear about, let's say, the Walker brothers, Jesse Owens, like all of those people that I would have never heard about before in your book. So once you started researching for your collections, how did you actually start, if you get me, with the fashion? How did you kind of get into it and was like, oh, actually, this is something now that could be made into a book later on?
I think interests are like, interest is everything to me. Interest, like, is what kind of drives me, and I think when you're pursuing an interest, like I have in brands and in storytelling and in language and in words even, like the dictionary would be my favorite book, and people laugh People laugh and kind of raise an eyebrow when I say that, but it is. I love the dictionary, and I love words, and you know, when you explore words alone, you can go down rabbit holes. And Beckett, I saw pictures of Beckett actually. I saw images of Beckett that I found interesting. That Born Mad collection, that came around through a quote actually, first and foremost. I saw a quote online that said, "We are all born mad, some remain so." And I just thought it was a great quote. And I Googled the quote, and it turned out to be a Beckett quote. And I had been looking at imagery of Beckett. I thought there's some really great imagery of Beckett by a guy called John Minahan, an Irish photographer. He was actually the first ever paparazzi, actually, an Irishman. Yeah, he would have chased Beckett a lot, Princess Diana as well. So anyway, his imagery and that quote led me down this rabbit hole about Beckett, who was a prolific sportsman, a champion boxer, a talented cricketer, a good rugby player, and a secret agent in World War II.
Medal of Bravery as well.
Yeah, the Medal of Bravery for his role in the French Resistance. So he was a remarkable guy, very, very tough guy for you know, like the playwrights and the authors. You know, they're probably the perception around writers and authors and playwrights is maybe you know, the sensitive and the kind of passive, and Beckett had actually a real, whilst a very slender, kind of slim, slight man, had a real bravery and toughness about him actually. You know?
Yeah, no, fair play. It was just very interesting to read about all these things that I wouldn't have known. I mean, I didn't know Beckett was a boxer. I've never heard of that before. Even the Walker brothers, as I said, Jesse Owens, the amount of people that you actually research. The Talent Man, never heard of that. Google it when you get home, very interesting. It's also mentioned in your book. And like, how did you find all these stories? Was it all Google, or did you have to go speaking to people, for those who haven't read the book?
Research, really, Google and researching and reading. And the book is called Threads. And I find when you pursue an interest, it becomes a thread, and it just leads you down these avenues, and you discover more and more. Those Walker brothers, actually, that was the second collection called Push, and a couple of weeks after that launched in Dunn's, I got a call from Dunn's head office to say, "There's an old man here at front desk. He's asking for you." So I wasn't too far away, so I called in. And sure enough, there was about an 85-year-old man at the front desk of Dunn Store's head office waiting for me. And he was a Walker man. His father was John Walker, who cycled for Ireland at the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm, who subsequently used the same bike to act as a courier for McDonagh during the 1916 Rising around Stephen's Green. And he was just very proud that his father had been remembered, and he wanted to show me his father's medals and his uniforms and all these scrapbooks he had. And he, that was, the Walker brothers were remarkable guys. They were cycling in a course like you have then Paddy Fitzgerald from here. Paul Gainey's grandfather, who cycled at the, well, he didn't cycle ultimately, but he qualified for the 1956 Melbourne Olympics, but the team weren't actually allowed to compete for kind of political reasons. But Paddy and the team went at the same time and made a statement on behalf of Ireland. And cycling is linked to kind of activism and a lot of rebels. There's a lot of rebels kind of. There's a rebellious side to cyclists, I find. Yeah,
like you said, in the 1916 Rising, has anyone been to Kilmainham Jail? They literally say like some of the bikes still have bullet holes in them. They were messengers, they were bringing people around the place, and it was just, reading the book, it was kind of like an Irish pride kind of a thing, especially Kerry pride, of course, but it was just interesting to see that being woven into your collections, I suppose.
Yeah.
Did you write at all when you were younger? Was this the first time that you were kind of like, maybe I should write something?
I did. I wrote my autobiography a couple of years ago. That was my first kind of real, I don't know, I have a primary school teacher who told me I should have been a journalist, and I actually considered journalism as a career. And then I figured with sport and with football and that, I figured I could never be a journalist. And so I went for teaching. I went for teaching, but probably looking back now, I had a primary school teacher who still says to me, you should have been a journalist, you could have been a journalist, or it's all right, and I don't know, I just found writing but then North Kerry is a writing country. You know, there's storytelling in North Kerry, Listowel, Finuig, my own club, Finuig, you know, music and poetry and playwrights, very intrinsic to our people.
Yeah, very artistic.
Storytelling, very intrinsic to North Kerry in general. So I think it's in that kind of a vein. I have some bit of an ability to write, but listen, it's not Pulitzer now or anything like that.
I enjoyed it.
It's North Kerry. It's North Kerry writing.
Did you find it, like, an autobiography is a bit different to writing a book like this, let's say, because obviously it's your own life, but did you find it difficult to write this, or did you, again, have all the information you kind of...
It was very difficult. I found it very difficult.
Okay.
I wrote about 50,000 words in a burst over about 4 or 5 weeks, and that's how I tend to write. I write it in my head first. I structure it and write it in my head, and then I go and write it down. And so I can write that way quite easily. So if I have an article to do right now for RTE website, and I did that in about 10 minutes, and it was 1,000 words, and I just was able to do it quickly and well, and a little bit of restructuring and editing, but I can write quickly. And I wrote a lot of this very quickly. So this was supposed to come out last year.
Okay.
And then I noticed the later chapters were stronger than the earlier ones.
So you went back.
And it just wasn't ready. So I needed to breathe a little bit, so I gave it 12 months, and it was a bit better with that bit of time.
Yeah.
But I can't remember what you.
I can't remember my question either, to be honest.
I'm sorry. and I had something good.
Oh yeah, was it difficult? That's what I asked.
It was, because do you know what? We had a second child in the middle of it all.
Right.
Yeah, that was a major. That really took away my energy for it and
your drive,
my focus on it. So it became very difficult after the newborn. And my mom, and I mentioned my mom in the beginning. My mom passed then as I was finishing it.
Yes.
So it became very difficult towards the end, just from an energy point of view. And you know the way the people here who write and who understand, you know, you'll know yourself. The nature of it is very solitary, and you need focus and energy, and it's a bit selfish, and sure, you can only do it on your own, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have to go off for a few hours, and I found it very difficult towards the end, and it was like, easy at the start, difficult towards the end.
Yeah, fair enough. It is structured really well, though. I don't know how many of you have read the book, but basically it's all the explanations about people, who inspired him, and then basically at the end of each chapter he explains this is where the collection came from, and explains each intrinsic part of the collection as well, like this is why the t-shirts are like this, the shirts are like this, or that's why we had wind cheaters. So it's just a very interesting read. I'm giving it to my father after I get it signed, of course. Did you have any, I suppose, authors that inspired you in writing style, or did you kind of just put it down on paper?
It's a funny book to try and describe or explain, I suppose. There's not. I don't know what the style of it is like. It's just something I felt. It's about 10 years in the making, and it's a collection of stories really that inspired the clothing collections. In terms of inspirations, I don't know. Like I found Mike Deneen. Mike Deneen is somebody I think back to. Mike Deneen O'Shea. When I think back to my school time, he left an impression. We would have studied the Hignat Hitterum for the junior cert. I can't remember, was it junior cert or leaving cert?
We did it for the leaving cert.
Leaving cert, yeah. A great read.
Yeah,
really, I found it really inspiring.
Very funny.
Yeah, very funny. Great ability to set a scene. I found it quite aspirational, actually.
Yeah.
The storytelling from the point of view of going to London and moving to London and living in London and trying to get by and thriving in London ultimately.
Yeah.
I thought it was an inspiring and a kind of an aspirational story. He also, I remember him, and I'll have to show you this.
Okay.
Because Mike Deneen really inspired this for me.
Okay.
Well, I left it, where did I leave it? My comb. I recently rediscovered the comb.
I
don't go a place without a comb these days. About a month ago I was on holidays, and that's the very comb I discovered now in a hotel room. And I ran it through my hair, and I've kept doing it for the last number of weeks because because I like using it.
Yeah, fair
And
enough.
when I think back to Mike Deneen in school, Mike Deneen spoke about his comb a lot, and he spoke about Brill cream a lot.
Yeah.
And you know, that...
He'll
that-
kill me for saying it, but my dad still uses Brill cream.
Yeah, do you know,
Yeah.
Brill cream, I remember around the time I started using a bit of Brill cream, and then I went away totally from using combs until about a month ago.
Yeah.
And I credit Mike Deneen for that. And my mother-in-law loves it, and my wife loves it, and
Yeah.
they like me to use the comb. They like my hair like this now, they like me using the comb, so I keep using it. And they think I'm using it for them, but I'm actually using it because I actually love the act of using it. But-
Yeah.
So Mike Deneen, the style of that book, the aspiration of a Hignot hitter, and the fact that he touched on things that I felt at the time. What am I talking about? The mid-90s I read that, I'd say, in school. Mid to late 90s maybe. And at the time now, funny enough, we were all discovering Brill cream.
Right.
At the time, our hair and a bit of, you know, we're 16, 17. And
Yeah.
and it was a thing. I remember the first time using Brill cream, and I remember thinking, Jesus, this will be, you know, you feel self-conscious kind of.
A bit.
A little bit.
Something
and
new.
It was something new, and it was and there was something, image, you know, you're kind of showing off a bit.
Yeah.
And all that, all the stuff that went with that, like, so. But I remember also saying, I'm going to do it. I'm going to put Brill cream in my hair, and I'm going to go along with it. And Mike Deneen did it. And sure, if they're laughing if they're pointing at me or laughing at me, what about it?
Yeah.
And so Mike Deneen, and then John B. Keane,
Yeah.
massive. Like I just think John B. was a total genius. Would have been a great president or Taoiseach of this country. When you listen to him, and there are YouTube interviews of John B. Just listening to him speak in the 80s and the 70s,
Okay.
he was miles ahead. He was just miles ahead of his time, I thought, in his views. Very liberal, big on women's rights, big on like marriage, and just very liberal and very forward thinking. I thought, aside from the works, as a man, as a leader, I thought his opinions for back then were very, very insightful, I thought, looking back now.
Yeah, I feel like yours were a bit different. Obviously, you mentioned in the book that like you see design and fashion, for a better sense of the word, in everything that you do. Were you always like that, or did it kind of suddenly come to you when you were like 16 or something? Were you like, oh?
I don't know, somebody asked me that, but a lot of people have asked me that, and the only example I can give of the first time I was conscious, my father had good style, I remember, his CIE uniform.
Right.
He drove for CIE for a good many years, and I always remember his uniform. He used to wear this grey shirt. They were good quality shirts with a good pointed collar. He used to wear a navy V-neck with a blue trim on the V. He'd wear navy Farah trousers. So it was brands like Farah, New Balance, which were made on the road out to Dingle. The New Balance factory was made on the marina in Tralee. And we used to go west most Sundays. And my cousin worked in New Balance. One of the first gifts I ever got was a pair of New Balance trainers when I was 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And they were made in Tralee. Okay. So New Balance, Farah, Levi's, Clark's, O'Neill's, Mitre, sports brands. It was brands that caught my interest first of all. And then I do remember being maybe 12 or 13. And my best friend in the road we lived on had a cousin from London. A girl from London used to come home for the summers. And I do remember thinking, I'm going to change my clothes now. That is the only way I can try to articulate how I understood clothes as a young fella.
And you were trying to impress.
I was trying to impress.
Yes, okay.
And there was this sweatshirt, I'll never forget it, the sweatshirt had 14 on the sweatshirt had 14 on the front. It was a grey sweatshirt. It had 14 on the front, and I used to wear it back to front because of bomber, listen. I used to put 14 on the back.
Okay.
and this girl, Linda was her name, Linda McKenna was her name, and she used to come home every summer, and every summer I said, I'll put on my bomber sweatshirt.
Oh, lad.
And I'd make off down the road to try and, anyway, she was, do you know,
She'll hear about this
she
after
was
this
older
too.
than me, she was older than me, and I was punching above my weight. I was punching above my weight, but I would always give that advice to young fellas. Punch above your weight. Punch above your weight. Yeah.
What can you lose anyway? Like.
And the power of clothes. And the power, you know what I mean? If your clothes can get you the job, they can cost you the job. They could get you the woman or the man, in this day and age.
Or both.
Or they could cost you, You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I do
yeah.
think power or clothes have that power if you want, and some people don't care.
Yeah.
But if you do, you can use them to help yourself along. You know.
This is why I wore this jacket.
Yeah.
I felt a bit fancy. I was like, I'm talking to Paul Galvin. I have to wear a nice vintage jacket.
So that's it. The book is just. I think it's just a way of a collection of stories about guys like John B and Mike Deneen and these guys.
It was interesting how many times Kerry was mentioned in the book with things that I'd never heard about as well. Like you said, New Balance was like, like that's mad. I don't know, I never would have heard about these. Or like you mentioned that Raglan Road was actually about a Kerry woman. And I've like sang that song multiple times. And it was just mad.
Hilda Moriarty.
Yeah. So just little things like that. I did feel like reading the book, I felt kind of proud to be a Kerry woman. I was like, yes. So it was just really interesting.
Kavanagh was another interesting guy. Patrick Kavanagh was a shoemaker. You know, like Harry Boland was a tailor. Patrick Kavanagh was a shoemaker. It was he wrote that poem about Hilda Moriarty. And he didn't get Hilda Moriarty either. He was probably like me, punching as well, like I was.
Fair enough, yeah. No, it was just interesting to read all those things that I'd never heard about. Like I said, what was in the book now? What was the biggest story that you'd heard that made you go, oh my God? Like, what was the most shocking one that you were like, this is class, I need to make a collection about this?
Oh, yeah.
You can name a few if you want.
I suppose the Beckett one, I found very compelling in terms of the sports angle, in terms of World War II. There was lots of other stuff. Beckett was nearly killed. Like Beckett was stabbed on the streets of Paris by a pimp. A pimp stabbed him just over the heart, or just below the heart, and he had life-saving surgery. And they say that Beckett's work was informed, the nihilism and the despair and the how do you categorise Beckett had his work there was something despairing and kind of nihilistic about Beckett's work, but it is said that, and his biographer says that this kind of hopelessness of his work was informed by the court appearance. So this guy stabbed him. What was his name? He had a funny name. But anyway, Beckett went to the court trial in Paris, and he asked if he could address the man who stabbed him. Yeah. And he asked the man who stabbed him why he stabbed him, and the man said, "Je ne sais pas, I don't know." And
then apologized.
All Beckett's closest associates and biographers say that Beckett lost a bit of his faith or a bit of his kind of joy on that answer, that your man couldn't give him an answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You, like, if something like that happened to you, you would presume that there was a reason, and getting an I don't know, you'd be kind of like, oh. Yeah.
Beckett's story I thought was amazing.
Yeah.
Harry Boland, the Michael Collins movie. So he was Sinn Féin, Republican, leading figure around the time of the Rising. His GAA career, he chaired the Dublin County Board at 22. He played in the All-Ireland hurling final of 1907. He refereed the 1914 football final between Kerry and Wexford. He trained UCD to win the All-Ireland hurling title. He had a remarkable sporting career. He then opened a tailor shop in Dublin, and obviously he's best known for his politics and the movie. And another man who was punching, Kitty Kiernan. But his family, a lot of Boland's family got in touch with me when I did that collection. So
really?
His close family reached out and rang me and met me, and he actually made a lot of Collins' suits, De Valera's suits, Arthur Griffith's suits. So, and a lot of the photos you see of those guys, Boland made what they were wearing. You know, I think he's a great reference point for Irish guys. So the Walker brothers was an interesting one to me anyway. Patrick O'Connell, who managed Barcelona. Yeah. I grew up with Harry Boland actually. Patrick O'Connell moved to the UK, lived in the UK around the time of the First World War. He was playing with Man United. The first Irishman to play for Man United was Patrick O'Connell. The season was broken up by World War One, and he went to work in a garage. But anyway, he ended up sourcing ammunition for Harry Boland to get back, to bring back to Ireland to help with the rising, the Republican cause. That man's story, Patrick O'Connell, was an interesting one, and yeah, I found them all interesting. But
yeah, no, so did I. To be fair, it was. I don't know what I was expecting from this book, to be honest, but it wasn't that, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thanks.
But
I'm going to do one on Harry Clark soon.
oh yeah,
Harry Clark, yeah.
upcoming.
I spend a lot of time in empty churches. I don't go to mass. But I like to go to church, and it's a bit like I like to make the distinction between training and practice. You can only train when there's training on, and the manager calls training, but you can practice anytime.
Yeah.
And you can only go to mass when mass is called, but you can visit a church anytime.
Okay.
And I love an empty church, and I love stained glass. So Harry Clark is one I'll do maybe in time, but.
Okay. And would you be like writing something about his past, or how?
I'll have to read more about him, but
Right,
I've already
yeah.
started to use stained glass in jerseys. I've done some gear. Some of the stories here are based on the Keohan Athletic Club brand.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I recently did a jersey for a club in Cork who have a Franciscan friary on their club crest. So I put some Franciscan, they have a band like the Kerry jersey, so I put some Franciscan stained glass onto their band. And I'd like to do that with the Kerry jersey someday. You know, we've St. Brendan on the Kerry crest.
Yeah.
And I think St. Brendan's story, I'm reading a lot about at the moment. St. Brendan's story was remarkable. And of course you have St. Brendan's Church in Róisín, where my mom came from. You've St. Brendan's Church in Tralee. You've St. Brendan's Church in Ardfert. You've loads of St. Brendan, like monuments, but I think he's misunderstood and maybe I don't know, when he's on the Kerry crest. I remember years ago hearing Kerry teams couldn't play in the rain in Dublin, and we'd lose in the rain, and we have.
Yeah.
And I'd always say, we can't go to Dublin in the rain. St. Brendan left Phoenix on a nave old, and he discovered paradise or America or wherever he discovered.
Times change.
and we can't play in the rain in Dublin. But
Was it different soil or something?
The weather, I don't know, the weather and
It was wetter up in
the
Dublin.
wet ball and whatever, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of, see, this is why I brought a little list, because I knew I'd run out of questions that I forgot to write down. Yeah, see, I'm just getting lost now. Any tips for those who would be writing, I suppose, who would want to nearly follow in your footsteps? Let's say we're thinking of maybe writing something now. What would you say to your younger self before you even started writing?
I don't know, I'm not a great man for advice, because I've been thinking about advice a lot of late in my life, and the nature of advice. I was the worst man ever to listen to advice. I was the worst man ever to take. I was worse again to take advice, and I don't ever give advice, really.
Okay.
I'm not. If someone asks, I'll give a bit of advice, but I never. So that's a very interesting question, because I've been thinking about it lately. I suppose to a young writer, and I don't consider myself really a writer, to be honest with you, but I would say a dictionary.
Yes.
Own a dictionary, have it to hand. I think dictionaries are. I would refer to dictionaries nearly every day, but I'm just interested in words. Dictionary, and I suppose reading. They say you should read a lot if you want to be a writer. You should read a lot. I don't probably read enough, but I've just got back into it again now, and yeah, the dictionary I think is. I always take a pen with me if I have a pen.
And write
I've
down
only a comb. If I could write with my comb,
I have a pen.
if I could write with my comb, I'd be all right.
Yeah.
I've no pen, but I usually have a pen with me.
To write
I
down
have
words.
notes. I wrote notes on my hand there today. I'm always writing notes on my hand.
Okay.
Usually I'll have a pen and a pad with me, mostly.
Okay.
And
What are you reading right now?
I have magazines.
Okay.
I read a lot
About?
of magazines. Well, there's a Monocle magazine that I subscribe to.
Okay.
Monocle, that's about urbanism, design and architecture, retail. It's culture really. It's. I think a lot of the people in this room would enjoy a magazine like Monocle. There's lots of interesting features around the arts, culture, retail, design, architecture,
Okay.
or urban living, that kind of thing. I picked up, I read The Reluctant Fundamentalist recently, and that was on a little table outside a bookshop in Dublin.
Okay.
And I picked it up, and it was a great read. It was really Anglo-US, Middle East relations.
Okay.
And I was told in the first person all through, and I thought it was a very interesting read. I'm reading a bit of Sevi Ballesteros' autobiography as well at the moment. Another good read. But mainly regularly magazines.
And did you read when you were younger?
I didn't really.
Okay.
No, I didn't really.
And fair play to you for the writing to come to you then.
Yeah. I don't know where that bit came from now. Nor Kerry.
You grew into it.
Mike Deneen and John B, I'd say. And
Yeah.
you know, it's just in the North.
Big
It's in the North Kerry
influences.
air. Yeah. It's in
Yeah.
the North Kerry air. I must say hello to the two ladies as well, by the way. It wasn't ourselves that met coming in the door, Rebecca, Denise and Rebecca, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair play.
So, yeah. So I was coming out of the church. I was just having a look into the church. I do love to visit a church.
Yeah.
And I just stuck my head in the door and I met the two ladies coming in. But
To be fair, isn't that a common thing to do even when you go abroad? You're kind of like, if there's a big chapel, like who hasn't gone to Barcelona without going to the chapel? Do you know, it's like a big thing to do. Even if there's no mass on, you just kind of go and see it.
It's funny, like the nature of it. I started now to bring my oldest daughter, not to bring her, but the odd time I would bring her in, and it's actually it's a good thing to do with a child, with a kid. You know, bring them in, and they get very engaged with the art and the.
Yeah.
But I took my daughter. I walked into a church in Ringsend in Dublin a couple of months ago, and as I was going out the door was our Lord on the cross, and he was there anyway, and my daughter got actually quite upset, and she said, "Why is he bleeding? And why is his feet bleeding? And why are his hands bleeding?" And I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
And I left thinking, that was profound. I felt it was profound. I felt I can't explain this to my daughter. Yet I have faith. I have faith, but I don't actually agree. I feel like that's not right either.
Yeah.
Do you know, our Lord on the cross bleeding and all that? But anyway.
I suppose we kind of grew up seeing it nearly every weekend, maybe,
Yeah.
so we didn't really question it.
Yeah. You know, it's a hard one to explain to a child.
Yes, no. What do you think would be the most interesting parts of this book, or the most size? Oh, I just spoke in Irish, sorry. The thing I suppose people would be reading this book, let's say these folk now, like if they were reading your book, what would be the most interesting thing to them, do you think? Or what do you think is the most interesting thing in the book?
I don't know, like I suppose I'm into like this, I like etymology, which is like the history of words, and I like the index page. When I say to you, when you said to me, what are you reading recently, I mostly read contents pages of magazines. I love
subjects kind of.
Yeah, I love the contents. I find the contents are a great example of editing and upselling and just, I love contents pages.
Like the names of your collection.
Yeah,
kind of the same thing,
yeah. And the names of the collections are my favourite part, and each feeds the next. So Vanguard, Push, Born Mad, Mr. Shelby, Bogman, Raglan, Tattooed Man, Boxer, Bike or Scaffolder, all those, each informs the next, and so that's why it's called threads. Like, I don't know, I suppose there's football stuff towards the end of it that I find particularly interesting. But you know, there's a massively rich history of Kerry football that I think is probably untold in lots of ways, that I want to try and bring some light to as well. So.
Well, it was very interesting to, let's say, do you know, sometimes when we see clothes, we're kind of just like, oh yeah, that looks great. But in your book, you specifically say, like, this is why this print is on this, and this is where the story came from. So that's what I found really interesting. Like, it was telling a story through clothes, which some people are just like, oh, he's just in fashion, you know, it's,
Yeah.
but you actually went deeper than that.
I suppose a long time ago, 15 years ago, I suppose, when I was interested in the business of this fashion business, I was going into lots of shops. First of all, I was looking at a lot of the copywriting that you see around fashion, and I found it to be very cliched, meaningless, often more than cliched as to be kind of like, it would kind of push me away a little bit.
Yeah.
And I would never speak it. And then the fellas I knew would never speak it. So I figured, first of all, there needed to be, or there could be another language for men, a language of fashion that I spoke, or my buddies spoke, and that could be more accessible. And the second thing I saw when I went into shops was print.
Yeah.
And I would look at print, and I would often say to, not often, but I did on occasion call a shop assistant, and I would say about a shirt or t-shirts, especially in summer, there'd be print everywhere. Sorry, can you tell me about what this print is here on this shirt?
What does it mean?
What does it mean? And meaning, sure, it's all about, do you know what I mean? Sure, this is all a search for meaning anyway in the book. But I would say, what is this print? And he might say, it's a bird. And I would say, any idea what type of bird? And he might say, no. And I would say to myself, well, like, you might as well make it mean something. Do you know what I mean? Print, if you can. So I would have put a lot of emphasis on print in the Duns brand and in the Cohan stuff for jerseys, that whatever you put into a garment, that it means something. So we would have done stuff like, I don't know, say Luke Kelly, for example. Luke Kelly played the banjo, but he used to have this strap on the banjo that had a particular print on it that I would have used in shirts. The Pete Briquette, I remember the Pete Briquette we used. I suppose I came from the bog. We cut a lot of turf, and the Pete Briquette is something I saw a lot of when I was young, and I was looking at bog culture, and you mentioned Talon Man and the bog bodies.
You have to Google that when you get home, like, it's actually amazing.
The bog bodies, yeah. And so Pete Briquettes and schlons and bike wheels and scaffolding and stuff I would have seen a lot of when I was kind of growing up. Stuff that I felt people could relate to. That.
Yeah. It's nice to have a story behind something other than saying this is a banana.
Like, a banana
that
or a
actually
fruit
made
or a
me
flower
laugh.
or whatever.
Yeah, that part in your book made me laugh.
That stuff was just an area you could
I know, but it was
disrupt.
funny, like, I didn't know, Hawaiian shirts and stuff like that. Like, it's nice to actually have like a story behind it instead of just.
Sometimes, and print is a very sensitive one then for the Irish guy.
Speaking of,
Scale.
I don't know. To be honest, it might be the South American kind of sugar skulls, but thanks.
Print is the one that you have to be very careful of with Irishmen,
Yeah.
in the sense that you can scale. I would be very sensitive to scale in terms of print, because if the scale is too big, it means reductions.
Yes.
It can
It has
affect
to be
business.
subtle, is it?
It can affect business,
Yeah.
yeah. So you have to be very careful of the commercial aspect and balance the design and the storytelling and the kind of conceptual part with the commercial part, because scale print can cost you a lot of money.
Yeah. It has gotten better though. Like you mentioned in your book, like maybe a few years ago, like no one would have dared worn a Hawaiian shirt, well, especially in young lads, let's say. But it has gotten much better of late. I think they're, like you mentioned in your book, they're getting a bit more confident, I suppose, in wearing different prints and stuff like that. Would you be going in that direction maybe, to do a bit more of a bigger collection?
I don't know.
A louder one.
I can't really, because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. They don't sell enough. Like a scale, there's a particular scale I work towards in print, and it's really small to medium
won't go over a
scale.
certain,
You can't. The guy won't wear it. The guy won't buy it, and it just becomes a reduction, and
Yeah.
it costs you money. And so I wouldn't. But I have seen guys, and I know from guys contacting me on social media, and I know from meeting guys that guys are a bit more confident now, I think, and they feel a bit more comfortable to be able to wear the things they want to wear, maybe than they were 10 years ago or whatever.
You might have pushed that as well, though.
Well, it was very uncomfortable for me when I started out.
But it's good that you did it. I think someone needs to start it, I think, because even us watching Paul, obviously when we were younger, slightly starstruck still, by the way. Like young lads seeing you, let's say, walking around being a bit more fashionable than others would be kind of like, oh, maybe we could do that too. So.
Well, that was a consideration, like, and I mean, early on it was very difficult. It was a very difficult couple of years because of the attention and the kind of, there was a lot of, I felt, misrepresentation, a little bit of misrepresentation, and I wouldn't have gone into the business if I didn't think I had, that I would ultimately be good at it, and so I didn't go in for the attention of it or to be kind of shaping or anything like that. I knew I had done enough research, and I knew I could bring something new, and I knew I could go somewhere in the industry. But back then it was difficult, I must say, but I did take a decision, because a lot of people said to me, will you go back teaching? Like a good man, go back teaching for yourself. Okay. And I said, I won't, because I feel this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And secondly, I think I can, what I was going through and what I was feeling and the weight of attention I was feeling, and the name calling, the camera phones,
taking pictures,
the fights I got into.
Okay.
I got into. Anyway, I felt I had to push through, because I felt for the young fellas coming after me, I felt it needed to be a little more comfortable for them.
Yeah, definitely.
And they couldn't be listening to the stuff I was listening to, and the finger pointing, and the videos and the photos and all that stuff. So I figured Ireland, going back to the time of Harry Boland and Beckett and all these guys, it was once very natural, and Mike Deneen, it was once very natural for an Irishman to be well dressed and to be comfortable with that. And I figured maybe we could get back there.
Yeah, I actually recently saw a picture of the last few men who left the Blasket Islands. There was 5 of them, all very well dressed, and it reminded me of your book then. I was like, geez, he was right. Like, they actually wore like 3-piece suits and everything, just walking about their day, like cutting turf, doing anything. Like, so it's nice to get back to that, I suppose, as well. Yeah,
I think so. I think it's an innately Irish thing, actually.
Yeah.
We would have made a lot of those men, the clothes were made here in Ireland, and they were made on the islands. And it was a very kind of what's the word? It was indigenous, actually, at one time. To make clothes was an indigenous Irish thing. And like Tomás O'Crihan is another man that I'm interested in, that I'm going to read more about.
Yeah, do.
But the Islanders had a very I don't like that word unique, but individual style, very strong sense of identity, and a very strong look. And Islanders, I love West Kerry, and the further west I go, the better I kind of feel, and the more at home I feel. And I do think Islanders have a special spirit and a special style, and a very strong identity that I think I'm definitely going to get into and start to talk about.
They used to be recognised in Dingle. They used to walk in single file, because it was obviously, they only had little paths on the Blasket Island. So they used to walk in single file even on a big road in Dingle, and they used to walk with their arms behind their backs and high cheekbones, which I apparently have. My mother is a bit better, but island descendants here. So I would definitely be up for something along, or to do with the Islanders.
Yeah. No, that's great. And there's a great brand there's a great brand called Inishmaan, which is, like we'll say, in fashion, in luxury fashion, it's a massively successful brand. A lot of well-known people wear it. Very expensive brand, and it's made on Inishmaan, family-owned, sold all over the world, but probably not well known in Ireland at all. And so Islanders are very stylish in a way, And Dingle, my wife loves Dingle. There's a very unique style in Dingle. I do find Dingle very much has its own style and identity and kind of confidence.
Yeah, I think you have to break into it. I think you get to a certain age and then you're kind of like, actually, I'm just going to wear what I want.
Yeah, I do find Dingle people I know are very, I find Dingle people confident and quite strong in terms of their identity and their sense of themselves. I don't know. I suppose I'm going on the few footballers I know, and just being around here in general, you get it in the accent as well. I think there's a good old strength to the the Dingle accent, like, you know.
Mine wouldn't be as strong in English, but my Irish, I've been told, is very strong. But in this book, this is actually one of my own questions that I was wondering while I was reading it. If you could meet anyone that you've written about, who would you choose to have a conversation with, to ask them about their life and what they used to do?
I'd say two people. Harry Boland will be one, and I'm meeting one of them in a few weeks' time.
Okay.
So there's a man called Mohed Altrad. He's a Syrian. Mohed Altrad was born in the Syrian desert of rape, actually. He was born of rape. His father was a tribal leader who killed his mother and killed his other son, Mohed Altrad's younger brother, killed the two of them. Mohed Altrad was set for life as a shepherd in the Syrian desert. He was sent to live with his grandmother until he was about 15 or 16. He was herding sheep and goats around the Syrian deserts. Discovered a school, something like a head school.
Yeah.
Moved to Raqqa, which was an ISIS stronghold. Happened to have intelligence and an ability for education. Anyway, won a scholarship. Got out of Syria for France, Montpellier. Studied further in Montpellier, moved to Dubai in telecoms in the 70s. This was the 1970s and 80s. Moved back to Montpellier and bought a scaffolding company. Grew the scaffolding company. Anyway, look, an entrepreneur, a very smart man, now running a €3 billion global scaffolding business called Altrad. You'll see him on the front of the French rugby jersey. He's on the front of the All Blacks jersey. Owns Montpellier Rugby Club. Has written a couple of books. A hero of mine in a way. But anyway, I'll get to meet him in a few weeks at a London Irish Montpellier again. This thing of interest that I mentioned at the start, and interests have led me to great places. I was at a wedding about 2 months ago, and it was in Spain. I got chatting to a guy here who was related to my wife, and I said something. He said something about scaffolding. I'm obsessed with scaffolding. I love scaffolding, and anyway, I had all this information for him about scaffolding, and he said, "Wow, that's amazing." He says, "I'm good friends with Mohed Altrad, and I do a lot of business with Mohed Altrad, and I'm actually meeting him at a rugby game in December.
Brilliant.
You must come along." And I said, "I will."
Brilliant.
So we're going to meet him in December in London, and I'm amazed. He's pulled out all the stops for us, and he's bringing us for dinner and bringing in the book and that. So Beckett, of course, would be a great one.
Yeah.
I'd love to chat to Beckett about.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Beckett's life was incredible, really.
He did a lot more than, like I said, I had no idea. So he did a lot more than people think. But I think all the people that you have written about in your book have done a lot more than people. You know, someone might have heard of, like, let's say Austin Stack, don't really know what he did or anything. We just know Austin Stack Park, you know. So it's just.
I think that's
amazing.
I think that's a great point, and I think Kerry footballers, like, no more than St Brendan being on the badge, then we go into Austin Stack Park, and I think we've become unconscious towards Austin Stack.
Yeah.
Park and Ossig below.
Yeah, we hear it too often, like.
Yeah, Park and Ossig. I was reading about Thomas Ashe lately. Thomas Ashe, like the Ashe Memorial Hall, Ashe Street, John Joe Sheehy Road, Joe Keohane roundabout, Fitzgerald Stadium. I think we've become a bit unconscious to the names, actually, and the people, and why they're on these roads and roundabouts and stadia and over the gates of pitches and that. So there's loads of stuff in there. Yeah. Loads of richness for me, you know.
No, very interesting.
Austin Stack, I've done a sweatshirt recently. You see to me the back of Austin Stack, the exterior of Austin Stack Park in Tralee is a major landmark for me, just from the fact that I'm in around there a lot, and I grew up going in there a lot, and the corrugation. I love scaffolding, and I love corrugation as well. And I've done a jumper recently now with some corduroy here on the panel that's basically just based on the corrugation and the signage of Austin Stack Park. And if you look at the old Irish, how Park Osteen, the stack is written, it's in this old Irish font. And I find there's a lot of detail in those things if you look at them, like Austin Stack. And Dick Fitzgerald of Fitzgerald Stadium was friends with Harry Boland. Dick Fitzgerald was another remarkable guy, a writer. Wrote how to play Gaelic football, you know, back in the 20s. So you know, lots of great inspiration and interest in those guys' stories, and I think our young footballers, be they Dingle footballers and Thomas Ashe, or Kerry footballers and Austin Stack or Dick Fitzgerald, there's lots of power in those things.
I feel like you nearly haven't lost that childlike imagination. Let's say scaffolding, I was always obsessed with scaffolding when I was younger because it just looked like something I needed to climb, you know? So it's just that design aspect of it, or like, you know how like kids are always asking like, what's that? So like Porcanosig or Róisín the Stack, you'd be like, what's that thing above the B? It's actually a dot, it's a H. And you know, like, it's like you haven't lost that aspect of yourself, that you can see things.
Well, I think you might have touched on maybe what it is to do with scaffolding that I kind of it might be the childlike thing of climbing it and that.
That was me anyway. I was like, ooh.
I worked a good many years on building sites as well, and I met great characters on building sites, and you'd often climb a scaffolding to get up the scaffold to catch up with a fella and have an old yarn or have a bit of crack with a fella. I remember being in the Holiday Inn out the Muckross Road in Killarney many years ago, 20 years ago, when it was being built. I was working on the site at the time, and I remember at one lunchtime going up into the attic of it. I probably was having I don't know what I was doing. I was having a break, I'd say. But I went up into the attic anyway, and next thing I thought I could smell cigarette smoke. And I was following my nose around this, and sure enough, over in the corner, surrounded by insulation, was another fella smoking a cigarette in the attic, and insulation everywhere. And I said, Jesus Christ, I'd put that out before you kill us all.
Oh, Lord.
But we were sitting down chatting anyway, and he was humming a song. And I said to him, what's that song you're humming there? And he said, it's Flower of Scotland. I said, geez, that's a lovely song. And I said, I'd love to know that song. So he said, meet me here tomorrow, again. So I went back up the following day at lunchtime, and there he was with the lyrics of the song printed out. Flower of Scotland. So we used to sing Flower of Scotland.
Where was he from?
Abbey-Dorney.
Okay.
He was a brother.
Right, you're grand. I thought he was going to say Scotland.
He was a brother of Conor Carney that played football for Kerry, Tommy Carney. He's now a vet. And
Grand.
he taught me the words. We used to sing it up in the attic. And nowadays it's my party piece for the odd. If I ever try to, I won't.
Give us a verse.
Here's the mic. But I have a good friend of mine tells me I sing the very same way as I talk.
Okay.
Which was he meant as an insult.
Oh, right,
and there's very little difference between how I speak and how I sing.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm not blessed with a singing voice. So, yeah, building sites in general were a place of fun for me. I met great characters and had great laughs on building sites. And so the scaffolding, I don't know, it's shape. To me, it's design. Everything is design.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, I mean, when scaffoldings actually go up the way, like, it's mad how the structure at the bottom can actually hold the rest of it, you know. It is interesting,
I do think it's remarkable. And there's unbelievable money in it. Any scaffolder I know is loaded.
Yeah.
But like the world is designed, like I don't know, people say to me, how did you get into design? Or how you were a footballer, you were a teacher,
Yeah.
how did you get into this world of design? But sure, the whole world is designed.
Yeah.
You can't have a football without design. You can't have a jersey without design. You can't have a church without design. You can't have shoes without design. You can't have a table without design.
Yeah, they're class, by the way.
Everything is designed.
I've been staring at them all day, I'm like, whoa.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The only thing I spend money on really are shoes.
Yeah, same.
Because I know that they'll last.
Yeah.
They're worth spending a few quid on maybe, but I spent a bit of time with my cobbler in Tralee there this afternoon. He works out of a half door in Tralee town, and off the mall, Pat the cobbler, his name is. He's a Ballyhig man. A gentleman, has never really been out of Kerry. He was in Dublin once, he told me.
Big day out.
He got the train to Dublin once, it's the only time he ever left Kerry. But he could tell you everything and anything about shoes.
Yeah, wow. Does anyone have any question they'd like to ask? May I remind you that this is live? Anyone? Yeah?
It's fascinating to listen to you, Paul. Congratulations on the book. It's fascinating to get a sense of how susceptible you are to influences and multiple art forms, and it's both visual and narrative, and the way that you bring it together and conceive and realize the ideas is really, really fascinating. And indeed, the collections themselves are wonderful. I had two things to say. One is a very brief suggestion, and one is a question. And when you mentioned Brendan, that sounds like a fascinating project. And I was reminded of the film, the animated film, The Secret of Kells, and Cartoon Saloon and Tom Moore, who made that film. explored some of the Brendan legends, and so there's a whole kind of storyboarding world behind that film, and Brendan Gleeson and Mick Lally as some of the primary characters. It's a whole visual world around Brendan. You might go there and bring it back to the GAA aesthetic. But my question is, if you wouldn't mind, if you do have a visual or a half an idea that's germinating around your response or your potential response to Harry Clarke, could you share it with us? Can you see a way that you could translate that aspect of Irish heritage into a contemporary look, or indeed a retro look? Thank you.
Well, you humble me with that kind of a question, because it's a fantastically intelligent question that I don't even know if I can answer you, to be honest with you, because I think intellectually you might be and intelligence you might be coming from a place way above me, to be quite honest with you. But Cartoon Saloon I've heard a lot about. I haven't seen, I think you mentioned the film. I haven't seen it, but I think Cartoon Saloon are just an amazing company, and I will definitely watch that. I've done some work for St. Brendan's board using St. Brendan. So they have this, you know, shame on me, I only recently discovered a monument in Feenagh to St. Brendan. It's on the crest of the St. Brendan's jersey. So I recently did a track top for the team using the St. Brendan print. I call it Navigator, and I've been reading a bit about him. Amazing. If I understand you correctly, you're talking about Brendan.
The question was on the Harry Clarke side of things. Do you have a visual for the Harry Clarke project? It seems so distinctive in terms of male figures and a kind of a 19th century elegance. Have you an idea how that might translate across?
I don't really. Only what I have recently done was a piece of stained glass in a jersey band for a team in Cork, a piece of Franciscan stained glass, and I placed St. Francis very subtly on the back of the jersey. I need to read and research more about Harry Clarke. It will depend on what I see or whatever I will see in a particular piece and whatever I read. It will probably come back to a word, and a word related to his work that will probably be the starting point. And this piece of print, you have to be very careful, of course, not to copy or plagiarize or disrespect or misrepresent the work of someone like an artist ultimately, who's no different really to the great painters. To me, Harry Clarke, and I think to everybody, he's, you know, his work is esteemed. So I don't know what it will look like. It will depend on what I read and what I see and what I visit and hear. And one of the galleries in Dublin, I know that the National Gallery, the one on Honan Chapel is right, yeah. And there's one of the galleries in Dublin that near the Dáil.
The Hugh Lane.
Hugh Lane, maybe, yeah. So really, it'll be research and whatever I discover that I might be able to. It mightn't be possible. I actually think it mightn't be possible. I think his work is so unique.
Yeah, otherworldly.
And it mightn't even be right. It mightn't even be right to do it. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes you have to look at it and say, that's really sacred work.
Yeah.
That you can't go near or try to, even if you're coming from a place of trying to honour it or respect it, it should be left alone. And I think that's probably where it's at with the Harry Clarke stuff.
It's potential for now.
Yeah. You mentioned. Did you mention Brendan Gleeson also?
Yes, I did.
Brendan Gleeson, the actor.
Yes.
I had the good fortune to meet him recently.
Did you?
I did, and I was, do you know, I think he does us a great service as Irishmen.
Oh, yeah.
I was so impressed by his curiosity and his interest and the questions. You know, he had met me for the first time, and it was like he was researching a role.
Okay.
And Colin Farrell was similar. Their curiosity came straight out.
Okay.
And they began to look for questions that they knew could mean something to me, and you know, it was just out of interest.
Yeah,
I was very impressed with them, both.
Ina Ella?
Hi, thanks Róisín, and Gormagat Paul. It's lovely to hear you talk about clothing, and the book is great. I got it recently, and I actually have given it to my students to read in UCC.
Oh, good.
It's passed a few weeks for me, so I'm very glad of that. Students are kind of traditional clothing. So I had 2 questions, if you don't mind. One, just around, do you see yourself maybe designing for women or taking influence, in the same way you've done with this book now around the men, looking at women in our history or significant women? And the other one is just about your influence, I suppose, generally in terms of clothing. I think, well, it's been obvious to a lot of us, I suppose, how quick that influence, in terms of how young men started dressing when you kind of made these statement things, around clothing. Do you feel that influence, like the impact you've had in terms of that? Because I think it's very obvious to a lot of us, and just how you feel about that. So those 2 questions, and Grammagad.
Thanks. Thank you. The women's wear, like, I would be bluffing. I would be bluffing if I was to try to work in women's wear, because I don't. How do I put it? I don't know. I can't speak the language, and I do think it begins and ends with language in terms of what I'm doing. I went in to try and create a language that could involve kind of the guys I knew. I felt the language of fashion was a barrier to me and to other guys, and it was language I didn't speak. So I went to kind of create collections and a vocabulary around the collections that I thought could bring men into the conversation a little bit. I suppose I think women's wear is more difficult. I think technically and in terms of fabrications and cuts and all the expertise you need in women's wear, I wouldn't have. And I also think I'd be bluffing a little bit, because I wouldn't have the real drive or interest kind of to go into it and learn it, Yeah, there probably is a bit of fear. But like, I suppose the stuff I was listening to, like, I mean, the grief I got going into menswear was enough to last me a lifetime. So I can tell you there is definitely a bit of fear, because totally I just wouldn't. Fair. No, there's that probably as well, and the influence stuff. I don't know. I have seen it definitely. I've heard it because guys have said it to me, and people say it to me. I don't know what to say about it, other than I knew at the time, going back, that it was important to keep going in the direction, because I do think clothes and self-esteem and the words you use and how you carry yourself in the world are all threads. I do think they're threaded. Your self-esteem, how you speak, how you dress, and how you go about your business, I think are a thread. And I do think that I just think it was important that young Irish guys, if they wanted to, were able to use clothes to feel better, express themselves, build an identity, build self-esteem, build self-confidence, if they wanted to. And I thought, I have to keep going, because clothes can help.
Yeah.
That was kind of so. And I don't know after that what it means. It means nothing to some people. I don't know. You can get tied up in it. It means nothing to some guys. Other guys, I think, appreciate it and understand that it can help them along. And but I definitely think, from a self-esteem point of view, it's important. Thanks.
Einelle, har couple of questions of us up here. Yeah. We will go to both.
Paul, just to ask you, in relation to fashion, and as you're so aware of it, I'm just thinking, there's so much talk these days about fast fashion, the circular economy, sustainability, and for you, as a designer going forward, would that be something that's very much in your mind when you are designing, a new range? And also, secondly, thinking about, the wonderful wealth of products, I suppose, that we have in Ireland, like woolens or linens or tweeds. Would that be something you try and maybe bring into your fashion ranges as well, going forward, just to kind of, I suppose, try and provide a link? I know he mentioned Turkey, but would you try and kind of bring in the Irish perspective? Yeah.
So it's a constant. it's a constant consideration on the sustainable part. And of course, what's my position on it? My position on it, first of all, from a design and storytelling point of view and a meaning point of view, I'm big on meaning, and I do think meaning is a form of sustainability. I've come to the conclusion that for me anyway, personally, meaning sustains me in a huge way. Now, of course, that's slightly different to the environmental concerns, right? But I do think if I make a garment and it is of Harry Clarke's work, and it preserves or promotes or celebrates or references Harry Clarke's work, or St. Brendan, or whoever, and there's meaning to it, I think there's sustainability in that. And the garment should last, because the meaning is there, designed to last. From a point of view of sourcing, constant consideration. My buyers at the moment in Duns now, we're discussing a lot supply chain and sourcing. And so Duns have moved towards introducing sustainable fabrics. Funny enough, it's already happening in the business. They have to be. Now there's a quota. There's a quota you have to meet, and until such time as you meet that, you can't and don't talk about it. So it's in the business. It's in some of my garments, but it's very difficult to achieve actually the fabrications. Only yesterday I spoke to a supplier in Portugal for the Kyohan business. I have made sustainable jerseys, recycled and organic cotton jerseys. Very difficult to execute on the idea, the aspiration of sustainability. One, lead times are huge and costs are quite high. But only yesterday I had a conversation with a Portuguese supplier of organic cotton. What's the price like? Are the minimum quantities? What are the minimum quantities? Huge. Timelines, February. Price, very expensive. So that becomes, yeah, it is. My answer at the moment is design with meaning, with Kyohan, try to affect the dressing room where you can actually bring a kind of a spirituality to it, and where the manager can lean on the garment for accountability and buy-in and team spirit. And that, I think, is a form of sustainability as well. In terms of producing here, difficult. But then look, you have some companies like O'Neill's who make here. There are some sportswear manufacturers that make here, a little bit more expensive, but a great bonus.
You know the Inishman brand that you mentioned, would that be the Lorcans?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
Hi, Paul. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's been really interesting, fascinating, and entertaining today. I wanted to just quickly ask you about the transition from footballer to where you are now, and how you found that, and how you have dealt with criticism on the way.
So I don't know. I thought it felt quite natural to me to move this direction, because I was teaching for 8, 9, 10 years, and I did consciously bring teaching to fashion. I figured that in bringing the meaning and the storytelling and the reading and the research, really, so I have a brand curriculum. So the Duns business is built upon a curriculum that is education-based. So I take education up here as being an outcome. If I wanted an outcome per season, I want there to be some learning, some education, some meaning. That's there every season. So education being the kind of, what you call it, the overarching kind of aim of the brand. Beneath that, then I have to have subjects. So I treat the brand as a curriculum. There are 3 subjects in the curriculum: culture, masculinity, which is a really tricky one, really, to try and express. Culture, masculinity, and meaning. I treat them as subjects in this curriculum that kind of represents the brand, and the subjects are taught through a certain language. There's language I use, the language of fashion, which I just doesn't work. I wouldn't have a brand if I was going into if I went into the business and I was talking the language of fashion marketing, and everything was to die for, and things were, you know, must-haves and all that language of cliche, I wouldn't probably still have a brand. So I was very clear on language, and I brought that from teaching and a kind of an education place. So I was bringing some of that with me. On the sporting side, I think sport is full of design anyway. Everywhere I look in sport, from the dressing rooms to the stand to the pitch, you look at the pitch lines, you know, the groundsmen. I always think, not always, I recently just discovered groundsmen really were designers, really, when you look at the proportions and measurements and dimensions of the GA pitch. I looked at all these groundsmen for years, lining the pitch to this measurement, and it's like made to measure like a suit. You know what I mean? You can measure proportion, and I in my head would often measure proportion of a look, thinking of the lines of the pitch. And a shoe, from the end line to the 13 is a shoe, and the 13 to the 65 is the trouser, and the jacket goes from the 65 to the 13 on the other side. So design is intrinsic to sport, and so the sport was a help to me, I felt, going into it. The criticism then, I don't know. I don't know how I dealt with that. I just drove on with it, and you know, it was sometimes, at times it was very tough, and it was a few rows along the way, but you know, I felt I had to be true to myself, and I had to kind of, if I could, make a bit of breathing space for fellas to be able to kind of step forward and step into their clothes and step into their shoes and get their heads up and get their shoulders back. And I think that was the very important part for me, actually, that I felt. And to the sorry, I didn't get your name, but your question previously was behind. Yeah. When I think back to that question of the influence, if there is to be any influence, it's that mothers, like Irish mothers. I think of my own mother, you know, and God knows now I caused her a bit of hardship, and going into this business caused her a bit of hardship. But you know, she allowed me to do it. She never tried to scold me or pull me aside, or she allowed me to breathe and walk and do it. And I do think that for mothers, and I think the book is really, in many ways for me, is for mothers of sons, that, you know, criticism, self-esteem, confidence, I don't know, you have to step on. And I think getting into your clothes in the morning, and getting up and getting on with things, be you whatever age, and be you kind of facing criticism or hardship, or maybe not feeling the best. I think the clothes can help you feel a little bit better, maybe. So, yeah.
I like that about the curriculum, actually, because, as I said, like, literally reading this book was it was like a history lesson nearly, so that was interesting.
Do you know, I was thinking recently, mothers and sons and clothes, like, who's the first person to put clothes on your back? Is your mom. You know, so I do think there's something very, what's the word? There's something very intimate about that relationship between mother and son and clothes. I see it now with my own daughter.
Yeah.
As a kid, as an infant, I was there putting clothes on her and dressing her, and, you know, yeah, that, I don't know, I'm just thinking about that relationship recently of mother and son, and how clothes really bond and can connect mother and son particularly.
Yeah.
And God knows, and my mother, like, never gave out to me, but she used to hide clothes on me.
Same.
I'd often come home and there'd be a shirt gone. And
the pink one's gone.
Yeah, any sign of that shirt? No. It's like the little puppy that went away to the uncle's farm.
Yeah.
It's gone to Uncle John's farm.
That happened to a pair of my shoes. Mom didn't want me to wear them anymore, and I came home and they were gone one time. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Chéileachair, any more questions? I can, yeah. I can tell my actually.
It's not a question, but just to commend you, I think, on maybe influencing a little bit. I suppose social media now is a massive thing for influencing, and bloggers and fashion bloggers. But I suppose in rural Ireland. I'm from Cork City, so I'm living in rural Ireland. But I think for young boys who, I suppose, they're sporting heroes, especially in Kerry, it's massive. So I think it's, you know, well done. It's a massive thing for young boys, teenagers, mom of a teenager boy.
That's a nice thing to end on. Paul, thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Roisin.
Yeah, thanks. That was great, actually. Yeah.
I have an announcement for everybody. It's a
Okay.
very important announcement. I have vouchers here for everybody as you go out. This is like the Late Late Show.
McCarthy's.